Hello, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session of MSP University. Get your PhD in pipe gen. For those of you who are following along at home and who have attended our earlier sessions, thank you so much. For those of you who this is your first session, thank you so much for joining us. This is a very special session for us. This is going to be one of the ones I'm most excited about. I love prepping and I love having Jeremey Donovan available. We're going to give him a chance to introduce himself in just a second. But MSPU, Get Your PhD in Pipe Gen, is our 3-day summit, and we're wrapping up our first day with this great session. And one of our amazing sponsors for MSPU is SalesLoft. Modern sales pros and SalesLoft have an amazing history. SalesLoft was the first ever sponsor of Modern Sales Pros back in, I think it was almost 5 years ago now. And since then, we've had an opportunity to work together on in-person events, intimate events, broad summit style events, and everything in between. One of the most amazing parts about working with SalesLoft is not just the great technology, but also the top tier people that they have at the organization. We've had on folks like Jeremy in the past, Kyle Fowler, Eric Martin. We even had on CEO Kyle Porter for one session. So every session that we do with SalesLoft is always a great opportunity to learn from some of the best in the business at what they do, from an organization that really is emblematic of everything that is excellent about sales and SaaS and technology selling. And I am honored and excited to have Jeremey Donovan join us here today. Jeremey Donovan is a longtime Modern Sales Pros member. He was a 2019 Most Valuable Pro for all of his contributions. And he's someone who, if you haven't met Jeremy, you haven't followed Jeremy on LinkedIn and followed his content or listened to the Hey Sales People podcast, you're going to be in for a treat today. Please get your notepads ready because there's going to be a lot of notes to take. But I'm going to hand it off to Jeremey Donovan, the Senior Vice President of Sales Strategy at SalesLoft, to both introduce himself and our topic today. Jeremy, so excited to have you on.
Oh, I'm super excited to be here, and love to just dive pretty much right into this. So we're going to talk forecasting today, and I love questions to come throughout. So yeah, you can put your questions in the chat, but the best place to put them is in the Q&A panel. So if you guys fire that up, I would appreciate that. I'll probably ask you also to chat some responses in the chat, just so I know there are human beings on the other side of the ether here. But let's get into it. I mean, I was talking with Richard just before we went live about how a lot of things that we ultimately become in our professional lives are things that were major gaps for us over time. I was joking, public speaking was one of them for me. I spent a long time in Toastmasters trying to get over that. And then another one was forecasting. Is I have a very analytical background. You could probably even just tell by the way I talk a little robotic. I work on that too. But I really thought, that basically you could throw a machine at the problem and not trust humans to forecast. And I quickly learned as I moved closer and closer to salespeople that yes, machines are part of it, but the bigger part of this is about people and process. And appropriate forecasting does start with people and process. I remember reading in various places that the ideal accuracy for a forecast is to be able to call a quarter within plus or minus 5% from day one of the quarter to the end of the quarter. Wow. And that's a really daunting and challenging thing to do. And I don't think people are particularly intellectually honest with like putting that number down on paper. Something we do at SalesLoft internally is that we do that. So we actually track what our forecast tells us every single day. We timestamp that, and then we look back and tune our forecast approach in order to make sure that we stay as close to that plus or minus 5% of target. And it does not always happen, but I am proud to say that we've been within plus or minus 5% of target the last couple of quarters. And hopefully some of the things I share with you today will help you get to that point as well. All right. So how do we actually get there, right? How do we get those forecasts as accurate as possible? And the key is you need to estimate effectively anything that can go in there. So there's the obvious stuff, which is whatever I've closed won. I mean, that's if you're if you're going to forecast, let's say you're partway through the quarter or month and you're going to forecast for that month or quarter, obviously you want that stuff that's already in there. Any kind of existing ops, that's pretty obvious as well. It's these other two things that help us get a much more accurate forecast. And we'll go into how this affects different segments, whether it's SMB or mid-market or enterprise. But one of them is the run rate of ops that you're going to create and close in the quarter. It's especially important in the SMB segment, where a ton of your business on day one of the quarter, you don't even know about if your sales cycle is less than 90 days. Even in enterprise, we found that this is important because although large enterprise deals, might on average take well over 90 days to close, upgrades, which are often a significant part of your revenue, often do get created and closed inside of a quarter. So you need a way to estimate that for your business. We'll talk about that as well. The last thing, which is useful to have an estimate of as well, is not only are you going to create and close ops during the quarter, but your reps, if your organization is anything like the organizations I've worked at, your reps are hiding ops, often day +1 of the quarter, and you want it, and some of those are going to close in the quarter, so you need to have a mechanism to try to estimate also that what I would refer to as pull, or not just I don't coin anything new, I just steal things, what is referred to as pull forward ops as well. Going to pause here. Go ahead, throw questions in there. I don't see any yet, but hopefully everything so far is clear, and we'll get now the next layer deeper into this. So, as I mentioned, it's all about people and process even before it is about technology. So even if you're just using, everyone's got a CRM of some kind. So even if you're just using a CRM and like nothing else, there's certain things that have to stay up to date. And this is just basic hygiene. Close date, obviously, stage and forecast category, which we'll talk about, amount and next steps. One really critical thing, and I got it in a note here, basically, is I found oftentimes reps will adjust the amount based on the probability of close. So let's say that you have an I don't know, $50,000 opportunity that if it closes, that's more or less what it's going to close at, but the rep only feels that there's a 50% probability of closing, then too often I'll see reps adjust that amount down to 25K. But that is the wrong thing to do. And the thing you need to encourage your reps to have discipline on is to make sure that that amount is the deal if it closes. So do not probability adjust. Do not let the reps probability adjust the amount. You are going to do that as a RevOps leader or sales leadership team later, but you need those amounts to be as kind of close to what the reps expect the final values to be as possible. I suppose if there is one asterisk there on the amount as well, you can see there's actually, I actually did the asterisk. It was in my head, but I was in the footnote too, is you'll see different variations. Sometimes you'll see like a manager override amount, which is a perfectly fine thing to do. Sometimes you see best case and or worst case. Sometimes you just see one or the other of those in addition to the sort of forecasted amount. So all those are fair game. All right.
Hey, can I actually hop in here with one point? I think this is important, and I do want to just take an extra second here. How much discipline and rigor do you put into the training of the sales team to be consistent on these things? Because I feel like, to your point before, right, we're not going to automate this problem necessarily away. So how much rigor goes into training the sales team to put in the right amount, not the forecast adjusted amount, or I want to keep it under this threshold so it doesn't go to the other team? Like, how much training do you put into that component?
I can speak for SalesLoft, right? So internally we put a lot of rigor into the forecasting processes, because forecasting is not just forecasting, it's actually your pipeline and deal review processes that go along with it. So we review our it's a cascade of process, and we will talk a little bit more about this, but your reps are required to update every op every week, and that doesn't necessarily mean things will change, but they do have to go through it and sort of review these four amounts. The other thing is that they're also meeting with their managers individually to review, and then we have pipeline and deal reviews depending on the nature of the segment and the importance of the deal that progress right throughout the quarter, all the way up to our CRO. And I'll give our CRO Steve Goldberg credit. When he came in, he decided, and I totally agree with him, it was a really, really good use of his time to sit at the very, very granular level in deal reviews to ensure that his point of view on inspecting these items, and then also inspecting deals using his preferred framework, which is a version of MEDDIC. It's called ICED. That his preferred framework was understood and adopted. So like he rolled up his sleeves in a very, very big way to directly enable and stress the importance of that approach. And then as our managers learned it, right, like any good leader, he began to he's not as involved in the day-to-day of every deal anymore. He's now working on other things that are strategic for the business. But he does get obviously involved in the biggest deals, right? Your CRO is always going to be involved in the biggest deals.
Right. And there's a live question that came in here, and I think it's lining up with this point, Jeremy. But the question's from Mike. What are the sticks or carrots that you use to make sure that the CRM and pipeline information is accurate? You touched a little bit on the process, but how are you actually getting the reps to do the work?
We do not. One in theory, I guess, could have financial carrots or sticks. We don't do that, right? We don't have any MBOs for our reps on, are they quote unquote, good corporate citizens following the process. All of their pay is base and variable based on quota attainment. But I think the key, I think, is a cultural expectation, right? So our CRO has an expectation that this is how we forecast, this is how we do deal reviews, and it's important to sort of be a good corporate citizen in that respect. So we don't need a strong carrot or stick, because the expectation and discipline around this is so strong. That's not always true, right? Like sometimes you need carrots and sticks, but interestingly and usefully in this case, training and enabling the managers first, which is so critical, and then the AEs has put us in a good position with this.
And I think that's a fabulous answer. The one piece I would add, and we've seen this come up time and time again in modern sales pros, that make sure that someone is sat with your reps and understand the challenges that they face in working with the CRM. Oftentimes, well-intentioned revenue operations or sales leadership makes the whole machine too cumbersome for an AE to use. So that's another piece on that. We're back to Jeremy's point. Maybe you don't actually need the carrots or the sticks. You can make it easy enough for the sellers to do the right things. Great.
Yeah, to your point, like over the years, we have put a lot of thought, and it's out of the scope of of this material, but we put a lot of scope into effectively governance processes around what can be updated in Salesforce. So, in the early days of a lot of companies, kind of almost anyone can get in and add a field to a contact or an opportunity or to an account. And as you get bigger and bigger, right, we're north of 500 people now. You just can't do that anymore, and you need governance, and you're affecting a lot of people if you add and or remove a field from Salesforce. So there's a really tight governance. And if anything, we have progressively fewer and fewer and fewer fields that AEs are required to fill out, right? Because we only want to ask them the stuff that's actually meaningful in either advancing the deal or in getting a more accurate forecast. My only, I hate to sell from the stage, but this is like transparently a little selling from the stage. The way we update our forecasts is to go into our deals functionality within SalesLoft. And it's, as you can see, you've probably used tools, whether it's SalesLoft or other tools for updating your deals, where you can get at all those fields, right? You've got your stage that you can update, your close dates, your amounts, and so on. So I'll leave it at that. If people are interested in learning more, you can reach out to me or reach out to reach out through the SalesLoft request a demo stuff. That is the end of the commercial portion of the broadcast. And so let's go into the different approaches here for VSB or SM, very small business, SMB, and enterprise. And I'm actually going to go in an interesting order. I'm going to talk VSB first, very small business first. I'll then talk enterprise, and I'll end with SMB. And the reason for that is that SMB is effectively a hybrid of those two approaches. So in very small business, right, here's the characteristics of it, is you've got a super duper short sales cycle. Sometimes, as little as, it's not impossible that it's a one-day transactional sales cycle. You're looking at low double-digit types of days here to get the deal done. So if your forecast window is 30 or 60 or 90 days, right, those deals, that is the create and close thing I described earlier. The other thing, and Richard, you were talking about making it not too onerous, making sure you don't make it too onerous for the reps, is like, you're not going to, if a deal's going to close in 5 days or 10 days, like, you're not going to review that deal in any particular depth. It's just not a good, it's not a good use of time. You want your sellers actively selling. So in this space, we do want the reps to update the ops, obviously, to keep them fresh, because not everything closes in 5 days. But we're not going to do as intensive of a deal review. But here we're going to rely on a little bit of a different model, which is we're going to estimate a couple of things here. So one is you have some degree of control over, which is paid inbound, right? So this is your Google AdWords, your LinkedIn search engine marketing. Another one that you have long-term but not short-term control over is organic inbound. So that's just people coming to your website requesting a demo or contact us or buy now, whatever it happens to be. That one I say you have sort of long-term control over is like, that's the strength of your brand, and that might take years of investment. The good news is that one also is like relatively forecastable, because if you do a little bit of work on trend and seasonality, you'll have a good sense of that. That does not tend to be that volatile outside of trend and seasonality models. And then the last piece is, when you're selling to that segment, also highly controllable, like the paid inbound is your outbound. So that's where the whatever predictable revenue math comes into play, that I've got this many reps, SDRs, AEs, what have you, making this many touches with XYZ conversion rate and so on. So you can add those three components together to come up with a reasonable forecast. So an examples of this, right, is and I'm not going to go through all the numbers here, but just by way of illustration, and not really benchmark data here at all, but you've got your paid inbound, so you've got a budget, and do all your math, and outcomes, based on how much you're spending, out's going to come your ARR. Similarly with the organic inbound, right, as I said, this tends to be more brand driven. You do want to adjust for trend and seasonality where possible. So hopefully you've got some good propeller headed analysts on your sales or revenue ops team, or maybe you are this listener here, because we're talking, I think, more to rev ops people than anything else. Like, hopefully the listeners here are some good propeller headed folks that can handle that sort of thing. But same basic deal. A comment on like inbound is, I used to be in marketing, and when I was in marketing, I thought everything was a lead. And now that I'm in more in the sales world and CS worlds, I've stopped thinking that, right? A lead is a demo request or a contact us. I don't have a name for the other stuff. Maybe it's like casual interest or something, passing curiosity.
A suspect.
Yeah, suspect. Yeah, that's fair. But like, if someone downloads a white paper, or comes to a Modern Sales Pros webinar, like, that's not a lead. What I think you want to be doing is pushing people. When you're nurturing, you want to nurture them towards demo requests, like to become hand raisers. And then last but not least, right, the predictable revenue. Most people have probably read or skimmed that book, so I won't go through this in depth either. But you've got a certain number of SDRs who do a bunch of work, and you've got your conversion rates. So that's going to turn into some money. So if you add those three pieces together, then you've got your forecast that comes out of that. Yeah, I'll pause there. So yeah, do drop any questions in the chat on VSP forecasting. Oh, we got one just float in. Some good, yeah, I love the acronyms here, by the way. So how do you get predictability at the top of the funnel? That's TOFU. There's also middle of funnel and bottom of funnel, but how do you get predictability at the top of the funnel for outbound, specifically outbound meetings per month? You know, the predictability there really is on, I think, on being realistic about what your SDRs or AEs are capable of doing. In my experience, a lot of the benchmarks that you see out there are really aggressive for outbound prospecting. Like you'll see numbers of like, I don't know, 12, a lot of benchmarks out there say 12 ops per month per SDR, full-time SDR in a typical SaaS scenario. That to me feels really aggressive. I think if you were to actually look at what's happening in the industry, it's like one of the dirty secrets. It's probably more like 6 to 8 ops per month per SDR. And then you have to be really careful to adjust that one also for at least certain seasonal periods where there are, where there just aren't as many days in the month. December being a great example of that. But yeah, I mean, if anything, I find the top of the funnel for outbound is actually the most predictable. The other thing I think that's super important just for folks is like something that we've done at SalesLoft is to maintain like the predictability of the top of the funnel. I guess maybe two things. One is we are really, really disciplined about account scoring and account assignment, just crazy disciplined about that. And the bigger you get, the more important that becomes. The other thing, right, is sort of that constant tuning of messaging and always pushing yourself to add more value, to legit add value in top of the funnel touches. So for me, I'm on the buying side a lot of the time, and if you send me a case study or an ROI calculator or whatever at the top of the funnel, like that's not helpful to me. That's self-serving to the rep, not value added to me. And I want to apply the same thing to the way SalesLoft prospects is how I want to be prospected. So like we created a bunch of assets that are true value, and things like we have a find, if you guys can Google this now, find-business-email.com or subjectlinegrader.com or emailgrader.com. So all of those things are like you're a rep, whether or not you're going to end up being a SalesLoft customer or not, you're going to get value immediately out of that stuff. So I think you got to find ways to give people value in ways that they can get. Give people value in ways they can realize immediately without necessarily becoming your customer. Another good question in here on the you can use chat or Q&A. We're looking at both of those, but do we have a general benchmark based on worldwide production in terms of average meetings a week from outbound? So absolutely yes. As I said, the benchmark on outbound is usually between 8 and 12 for outbound, and is often between say 20 and 30 for inbound. So I think where I think some of the fiction numbers come from is that people start blending outbound and inbound, right? So if you're doing 10 outbound and 30 inbound, but it's a blend, right? You're going to get some number in between, and I think that's where the like grossly inflated numbers come from. Yeah, and then before we move on to the next slide here, just like a couple tips to streamline your processes, even beyond like what the reps are doing. This contract terms thing is incredibly important. That if you're doing high velocity deals, build contract terms and conditions that are customer favorable, right? So that you don't have to go into red lines, and in fact, even avoid red lines is a really important part of velocity. All right, that's it for VSB. Someone asked weekly or monthly. Maybe Mike, you could clarify that one, either in the chat or the Q&A.
Yeah, Mike, you should be able to.
Oh, sorry, those were monthly numbers. So 8 to 12 outbound ops per month per SDR, 20 to 30. It's just a big range inbound per inbound ops per month per SDR? Good question. Thank you. Yeah, if it was weekly, it would be a problem. Great. Okay, so let's go to enterprise. As I mentioned, we'll go like from VSB to enterprise, and then we'll just do SMB really quickly because SMB is the blend. So in enterprise, things are right. They're the polar opposite. Is you've got the sales cycle that is often way longer than what you're forecasting. Like whether you're doing a month or a quarter, right? Your sales cycle is often 6 to 9 months is sort of a typical enterprise sales cycle. And I was talking to someone earlier today who had like a 2-year sales cycle. So it's just all over the map, but there are plenty of deals, even when you have a 6 to 9 month sales cycle that takes you more than a year to win, particularly with the jumbo companies. So here you actually do need to review like every deal. And some of those deals, the monster deals, right, are going to go all the way to the top of the organization. So this is another like epiphany I think I had along the way, which is I used to think of these frameworks like BANT and MEDDIC as qualification methodologies, but the epiphany I had along the way, I don't know exactly remember who gave it to me or where when it was like, no, they're not qualification methodologies. They are essential deal inspection, deal review methodologies. And maybe that seems obvious, but it took me a while to get there. And so there are lots of them out there. The very common to use MEDDIC these days. We use a condensed version of MEDDIC called ICED, as I mentioned, but it's just MEDDIC in disguise. It's just shorter. So you can read the collapsed version here. One important thing is so I do a podcast. I do this Hey Salespeople podcast, and lately I've been interviewing top AEs, and I asked the top AEs what's a deal that got away and why, and what happens when they get away is it's usually one of these things, whether it's a MEDDIC thing or an ICE thing, but it's different. It's often different every time. And what the reps like these best reps say is I lost the deal when I wasn't watching all of it, right? It's like I had a champion and a buyer and a process, but I didn't know the pain, or they didn't have enough pain. Or, I had the pain and the champion and the process, but I didn't have the economic buyer. Like it's one of these things. So that actually is a discipline that Steve Goldberg, our CRO, instilled really well in us, is that when what he observed when he came in was people who become sales managers sort of do what their managers did before them, and they ask the same questions. And he wanted to kind of break that pattern by saying, like, yes, those are great questions. And what you need to do is you need to make sure you are inspecting each element of each deal every time, right? So that you can't, sometimes a manager without training will just focus on one facet, but you need to focus on every facet in each of the deal reviews. So I spent a long time on this. I think it's like the most critical thing for deal inspection. And that's where, right, your manager or your RVP or your CRO, right, can jump in and help move deals forward when they get stuck. Something that we will do, or we do, is we take those categories, those ICE categories, and then we attach a score to where things are. And, by way of example, I'll just choose economic buyer, for example. If you don't know who they are, it's a 0. If you've identified them but haven't engaged them, that's a 1. And if you've actually engaged them, then that is a 2, right? So each one, and you can define these as you wish. I suspect, because we built this sort of scanning all the stuff that was out there, it's probably going to look a lot like this. And I do have a MEDDIC version of this with 0, 1, and 2 as well. So if anyone can connect me on LinkedIn, welcome that. But if you hit me up on LinkedIn, then I will respond back with the MEDDIC version. The other thing we do, right, is again all about process, and you can see it's just a snapshot of a Google sheet here. No fancy technology. Is we make sure that our reps on not all deals, but on certainly our enterprise deals, are using mutual plans with the customer. Customers really never get in and update the plans. It's pretty rare. So what the reps will do is they'll establish the mutual plan relatively early, and then over the course of the deal, right, they'll put this up on the screen and jointly update it with the customer. So I think the joint updating is the key. For those who actually do want to rely on some tech enablement for this, there are some cool tools out there. I've mentioned a few of them here. They're smaller, tend to be smaller companies, but Recap to Core, Deal Point. I think Close Plan has something too. So there's a bunch of them out there that have mutual plan workflows. But truth be told, 99% of the time, I should say 99% of the AEs I talk to are using just a Google Sheet basically to be able to do this.
Yeah, and that seems like an area too where don't buy technology in search of a problem. It feels like having it in Google Sheets at least for a little while, getting disciplined about using it is probably the right place to start, and then throw tech enablement at it.
Yeah,
that would be my sense. 'Cause I can imagine there's someone Googling right now, and they're all great tools, but if you don't know how to use mutual action plans, it's not part of your sales motion. It's adding technology is not going to all of a sudden make it happen for you.
Yeah, it's even that point. I was reflecting earlier on like what was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made in RevOps, and one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was we had a incentive compensation management problem, right? So we bought a tool, and the tool the problem wasn't the tool, right? And the tool didn't fix the problem. The problem we had was that our comp plan and the way we assign credit for different types of exotic deal structures was just all over the map and very mystical. So we spent a good 6 months just actually figuring out what our comp plan was. And if had we before we could even really start implementation, and so we just burned 6 months of money that was unnecessary, whereas we could have had probably a 60-day implementation instead of a much longer implementation. So yeah, definitely get your processes nailed before you invest in tech.
It's back to what we were saying at the outset, right? Like it's the people and the process, and then the technology. But that people or process, one of those two first, and then you can deploy tech at this as well. And
I talked on that one, but one interesting thing. I talked to my boss about it because I was paranoid when that happened, and he's like, "Yeah, but buying the tech was a forcing mechanism to solve this problem," which
it's like the personal trainer paradox, right? Like back when we used to be able to go to gyms, you're supposed to go, but when you spend X $100 per session on a personal trainer, you probably show up more, even if you kind of know how to work out. So I believe that to an extent, but damn, there's got to be an easier way.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. All right, and then I talked earlier about like the rhythm, and this comes from one of our VCs, Insight Partners, and I really like it. It's like, what do you focus on each week of a quarter, and when do you focus? The CQ thing is current quarter, so you'll do a current quarter pipeline review. Where you see NQ, that's next quarter, right? So as you're approaching the end of the quarter, you start to think about the following quarter. So you're doing, various deal reviews, so deal review is individual deal, obviously. Pipeline review is, I'm not necessarily going to go at the, deep in the individual deal with that scorecard for Medic or ICE or whatever, but I'm going to sort of look holistically at where all my deals sit, and you can sort of see the rhythm for all those other things. And I love that they even break it down not only by week, week of the month, but also day of the week of who should be doing what and when do you roll things up. So great material from Insight for folks who want to improve their kind of forecasting rhythm or cadence. In enterprise, so back in the VSB, and I mentioned it a little bit, and I don't even know if I mentioned it actually. So in VSB, we just use stages, right? So the traditional stages, whatever you call them, stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we know from historical data how to stage weight those deals. And different deals, sometimes you have different deals that should be weighted differently. So for example, our upgrade deals tend to have a much higher win rate, obviously, than a new business deal. So, but you can stage weight. In enterprise, it's very conventional to do things this way, right? Which is, rather than using stages, you also have a forecast category, and that's built into Salesforce, or you can, build your own sort of custom pick list here. These are the categories we use: close, commit. So close is closed One, commit is like the highest probability before closed, probable, best case, reviewed. And then we add these things up into different sort of other categories. So our close, commit, and probable is our back of the envelope estimate for the quarter. And then we add best case to that to get stretch. We add review to that to get pipeline. One thing that we also do, and I wrote here, better but less common, which is what we actually do, is to use weighted forecast categories. So a lot of people will just roll this stuff up, like what's the commit number? We don't just roll up the commit number. We actually category weight. So we know historically if something was at commit, what's the probability that it's going to close in the quarter. We know if something was best case, what's the probability that's going to close. So we actually forecast weight. And I would say that of the things that have improved our forecast accuracy, besides the process and the people training, which came first, one of the most critical factors to getting the forecast right was actually applying forecast weighting, which is uncommon. Yeah.
Couple questions as a recovering enterprise sales leader on this, Jeremy. How do you handle things that are like commit for the year, but probable for the quarter, or best case, for 2021, but maybe there's a shot for this. How do you represent that inside of both this framework, and then how do you think about that inside of your CRM?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a gap for us is we only, we're rolling it up based on close date. So we're only looking at current quarter and next quarter.
Okay.
We don't, and that's one thing. We don't actually look at a longer range forecast than that. Maybe we should. Yeah. And then the other thing I was going to say is that when we I said we track our forecast accuracy by snapshotting every single day what our estimate is. We only do that for the current quarter. We actually don't do that for the next quarter. So I won't profess to have any accuracy one way or the other on next quarter. That's really hard. Really, COVID or no COVID, that's really hard.
Yep. Yeah, it was a challenge that I know occasionally in enterprises, right, where you've got these big blocks as well. We know we're in the procurement motion. We know it's going to close, right? We know it's going to close at this time out, but there's a chance, we can pull it in. So that was really curious.
I mean, it also depends, right? I probably be marching to a different tune if like we were one of those companies that had 1 to 2 year sales cycles, because if you're in a company like that, then you probably do need to pay attention, right, to commit for the year, and even more so if you're a public company where you're kind of calling that number to the street with some frequency. Like there's even more rigor that needs to be applied. But for sort of the traditional, whatever it is, 6 plus or minus month enterprise sales cycle, I would say this quarter, next quarter is sufficient. So SMB is going to be easy, right? Because now we're just going to blend those other two, right? So we've got sales cycle kind of roughly the same as the forecast window, and right, you're going to have important big deals, right? Whatever important is, I think that it's either a big deal or in terms of ARR, or it's at the upper end, it's at the upper end of like your size or whatever your segment is. So like that, because that account is going to have high potential, especially if you have a land and expand sales motion. So here you're going to sort of mix those different types of things. I talked about stage weighting before. So we're going to stage weight each one of those things just like we do in the VSB segment. And then the other thing, and this requires at the end of the day, it would probably burn some people out, but it requires a little more thought. But folks will have the slides so they can look at it. Is we're trying to make an estimate of the run rate that I talked about earlier, created and closed in the quarter, and we're also trying to estimate how much revenue will get pulled forward from future deals. And a way to estimate that is just to lump those things together, and then come up with an estimate of like how much in a given quarter do you expect to have, and then just quote unquote burn that down over the course of the quarter. So you're sort of plugging your forecast for that extra amount. So we've actually experimented with different non-linear versions of that plug. And for instance, right, if you're in sales, you know that a lot of the deals are back end weighted, right? That they tend to come in towards the end of whatever your month or quarter. So we've toyed around with more non-linear versions of this, and it turns out that this actually is a pretty, like, that extra complication for non-linearity is not worth it. And we're currently just using a linear model for this run rate, and we burn that down.
Good live question came in here, yeah. Jeremy, just kind of like rules of thumb for enterprise, small, medium business. How many deals should be closed by a rep in a quarter?
It's hard to answer. I mean, it's super hard to answer that, because obviously it depends on, like, every company is its own special snowflake of deal size and complexity. I mean, what I can tell you is like quotas are actually it's more common to know the quota and then back out the number of deals from that, right? So a pretty traditional like SMB quota is probably, if someone's pure new business, because again, like, more complications of context is what if they're an account manager also. But let's say you're a pure new business person, like, I think a 600K quota is pretty common in the industry. If you are an enterprise salesperson, could be $1 million, 800K to 1.2 million, I think, is probably a pretty traditional range for an enterprise salesperson. So I'd then back out off of that, right? Like, if you're 600K and you do 100K deals, that's 6 deals. If you do 50K deals, that's 12 deals. So yeah, I think you just have to sort of back out, and it also, don't do the CFO thing, which is just assign a quota and then expect people to hit that, right? Like, you have to be realistic about quota attainment and design your quota. Like, we try to design quotas so that somewhere, basically 70%, but call it a little north of 2/3 of people are going to meet or exceed quota in any given period. Like, that's the right way to tune. So that's that's how you decide on quotas, so that you get 70% hitting or exceeding in a period.
Yeah, I think there's a lot on this. The other way I would look at it too is if you have a sense of what Jeremy had mentioned this before for SDRs, right? If you have a sense of what the workload is, you can also build up to what that quota is. So you can say, hey, we have really gnarly opportunities and a rep could never manage more than 5 a quarter. We're going to close 1 out of 5 based on our historical close rates. It's this much. You can go bottoms up on that as well. And that's where you can end up with kind of the best of both worlds where, hey, did we set quotas that were wildly low or wildly high? Okay, cool. Are we feeding our sales team enough from the math that Jeremy had earlier? Or is this a situation where, oh, actually, you know what, if we invest 1 more head in marketing, the sales team is going to be jamming and we're going to be good to go. So I think it's an important way to think about it too, bottoms up and the top down or back from quota.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that it also this sort of deal velocity is so dependent on whether stuff came inbound or is outbound. The inbound stuff tends to be smaller dollar, way faster velocity.
Yeah, and I think there's also the notion of there's some folks, we had a Salon, Jeremy, or roundtables earlier, and we were talking, category creation. And in that world, it's such a different animal because you may not even have benchmarks to think about because you're doing something so different.
Yeah. Oh, there's another question came in. I think it's a great one. Advice on rolling up forecasts. So again, like, what we're doing is we're rolling up, just take those 2 extremes. The sort of stay in the VSB or SMB segments, it's stage weighted forecasts plus estimates of run rate, which tend to be larger for those segments. And then in the enterprise space, we're rolling up the combination of effectively the rep commit, but the rep commit being historically weighted by what's going on, plus a sort of smaller plug there for run rate. So it's a mixture of the things that Sarah mentioned here. The Venn diagram one I'm not familiar with, so I'm not sure about that. And then manager overrides, yes, we do that. So our managers, and in fact, that's what we are rolling up is our reps make an estimate, and then we have a manager forecast amount that is I would probably 95% plus of the time, it's exactly what the rep was forecasting, but every once in a while, the manager will make an adjustment to their number. Cool. So it's hard to talk about forecasting without talking about AI and machine learning. So just like a few thoughts here is, getting back to what I said originally, we're not at the point where a machine can do this all by itself. I mean, maybe one day with all the recording technology we have out there, and like imagine you had some like super AI, like that movie Her, for those of you who've seen it, that sort of is with you everywhere. Or whatever, any other AI-esque thing where every single conversation, every single interaction, if you were to be able to analyze all that stuff, sure, that might be smarter than a human, but it doesn't feel like we're, I would never say never, but in the remainder of my professional career, I don't think we're gonna be at that point. So humans still matter. So I think of it as augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence, right? So this stuff like dynamically adjusting those weightings to both your stages as well as your forecast categories, I think of that as an application, especially if they're dynamically adjusted, of machine learning. It's not so much AI, but it's more ML. The burn down, the run rate burn down thing is another example of that. And then I think the other place where AI/ML is proving quite useful is basically telling you when deals are off track, right? If a deal gets pushed too many times, there's a red flag, right? Or if you have not received an inbound communication or had a meeting with a prospect on a deal that's in commit in more than 2 weeks, probably should not be in commit. So things like that, right, I think matter. And then we're getting closer, I think, probably with, there are some examples of this already with next best action to say, hey, like, you haven't had an inbound email from this person in XYZ, let's say, maybe it not only says here's what you should do, but it actually queues up a cadence for you to engage that person to sort of reactivate the op. So I think that's kind of where things are going. So we have time for more questions, but yeah, go ahead, Richard.
No, I was going to say that feels like the next kind of horizon in a lot of this, right? The next best action, where you've got the mutual action planning tools, you've got playbooking, giving you real-time feedback, you've got all of the information that exists, the cadences and all of that, being able to suggest the next best action feels like the next horizon in a lot of this, was really integrated from the context of the deal, the context of the AE or the SDR.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I also think there's a few ways to approach it, right? Is we probably mostly do know what the next best actions are. So we can kind of just pre-configure the system that, if X, then Y. And then, but the real dreamy AI ML stuff is like, you don't even have to know that either. It will say, okay, other deals that close successfully, this happened at this stage.
Yeah.
You need a lot of data to do that. So it's way more viable in the B2C space probably than it is in the B2B space. There's just, even at larger companies, there just may not be enough deals to actually do that.
Yeah, and I think this is something too where we're a little bit on a tangent here, but we see like intent providers. I mean, now 6 Sense is what, a $2 billion company.
Yep.
4 or 5 years ago, really you had to be Dell or HP or Ford Motor Company to take advantage of intent data. And now it's almost a foregone conclusion that it's part of your account-based selling stack. So we'll Moore's Law will get us there. Probably faster than we think, but it won't put us out of a job quite yet.
Yeah. Well, 6 Sense is super exciting to me. Part of the reason it's exciting to me, again, having been in marketing and now in sales, is I think like marketers were to their credit early on in understanding that intent data could be valuable. The problem was that we never connected the dots on the intent data that marketing was gathering, first party and third party intent, and then translating that into like, hey rep, this account is interested, go after them.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, Sixth Sense has gotten so quickly to their, $2 billion valuation is like they licked a really pressing, they licked a really pressing problem in a creative way. Yeah, so just to wrap, I mean, basically stuff I've been saying, repeated themes here, right, is like get your process, get your people stuff down, apply technology to make it better. You don't use the same process in every segment. I think that's critical. And then, yeah, and augment what you're doing, but don't you still need a lot of that. It's sort of point 1 and point 3 are pretty similar. So don't let the machine take over quite yet. So we got some Q&A here, and then yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so just a couple more minutes with Jeremy. It's very rare that we get him for the full hour pillar to post. So if you do have any other questions here, give folks just a second to put this in the Q&A panel. And Jeremy, since we started to hit on it a little bit, I'm going to throw a curveball that we actually hadn't prepared for. What kind of emerging tech has you most excited? That's going to make our lives easier as revenue leaders. Is there a type of tech that's got you fired?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few categories for sure. And I'm glad you asked me that instead of like, where do I think we're going to be in 5 or 10 years? Because I don't know. But the stuff that I think is super fascinating is, there's lots of discussion going on around messaging optimization. And so the application of AI and ML to messaging optimization. So, I mentioned like these subjectlinegrader.com and emailgrader.com that we have. That's sort of step 1, right? Which is using machine learning to figure out what's right. But we're starting to see some vendors, do some work where they'll actually tune and clean up. It's almost like Grammarly for sales emails based on real data. So there's some that stuff is super exciting. There's a bunch of companies in that space. I've also been spending a lot of time just, sort of now that we have to be RevOps professionals and not just sales ops professionals, I spent a lot more time understanding, and I already had a good understanding of the marketing tech landscape, but not so much the CS tech landscape. So I spent a lot of time thinking about like the CS tech landscape, which is interesting and less crowded. And the stuff that fascinates me there is like, the data is way less structured in the CS world because everyone's product usage adoption data is in a different database. So, now there are some companies that are bringing that together. I think Segment is a good example, is like the system of record in the same way Salesforce is in sales data. Segment is becoming more and more, for many companies, the system of record for product and customer data. But then there's still a lot of data in things like Redshift and Snowflake and whatever. So I just think extracting insights at the customer level and creating next best action, I think, is a super fascinating area as well.
And I think that's one of those ones too, where it's gonna, hopefully in the future that goes full stack, right? We know what our most valuable users, that our most valuable customers are doing. Let's make sure marketing has that information to target our marketing campaigns towards those individuals or accounts.
I also love, these companies who are in the opportunity management space, innovating there, right? So stuff around relationship mapping, stuff around mutual plans. There's a lot of innovation happening there. So yeah, there's never a dull moment in the world of sales tech. And even today, one of my buddies said, "Hey, have you heard of this company?" And it's always every day. It's like, "Have you heard of this company?" There's a lot of capital in the market right now. So
it's like in I was in B2C Martech about a generation ago. And if you look, Jeremy, if you're familiar with the Luma Partners, Lumascape, it's a marketing technology landscape, and there's 17,000 tools on it, 18,000 tools. Dave Delaney at Tenbound does one for the sales development stack, and it's only got about 600 tools on it right now. So I think we're in the early stages of something here, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm with you. And it's just on and on, but early stages of consolidation for sure. And it's happened in other worlds, right? It happened in the MarTech stack largely, and it's in waves,
Expand and then contract. Well,
yes.
Well, folks, again, I really want to thank Jeremy It's always a pleasure to have you on. I wish we both had time to do it more. And once again, this was all made possible by the sponsorship from the team at SalesLoft. They've been a great, a true partner to Modern Sales Pros as we've grown, and we like to feel that we've been a partner for them as they've grown as well. This also wraps our content for the day. Tomorrow, we're going to begin at 9 a.m. Pacific on the role of data and building more pipeline more quickly. We're going to dispel some notions about personalization at scale. And we're also going to talk about what happens when it goes too far and you reach that icky zone. But with that, I want to thank everybody for sticking with us through a day of amazing content. Jeremy, a pleasure as always. I really appreciate this session. And I wish I'd had it before when I was running a sales team, because I learned.
Thank you.
Jeremy, please be safe and take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.